Coptic Survivor Community Series. We have SNAP joining us today, the Survivors Network of Those Abused by Priests. I am so excited for this talk. Been waiting for this for a long time. I'm so excited to introduce you all to SNAP and our speakers today. We have Zach Hiner and we have Melanie Sakoda. Zach is the CEO, the executive director of SNAP. And Melanie is the survivor support coordinator for SNAP. And these two have been just so supportive of Coptic Survivor and the movement and have been so resourceful, so amazing. I go maybe a little over 10 years back with SNAP, was the first time I attended my first conference. So we have a long history and friendship, and they've pioneered this whole anti-clergy sexual abuse movement and activism since the 80s, since 1988. So I'm just so excited to hear about the history and everything that Zach and Melanie have to share with us, and all the amazing work that they've done to save so many lives globally, and for exposing the Catholic Church, being the first to have the guts to actually expose the Catholic Church. So you were talking to the, I don't know, this is like the mecca of anti-clergy sex abuse. I'm so excited to hear from you guys. I don't want to talk too much. So I will let you guys go ahead and get started and introduce yourselves if you'd like.
Thank you, Sally. I appreciate that introduction. Really happy to be here, for folks listening in. Sally previously gave a talk at one of our SNAP digital conferences about her incredible work as an advocate, and talk about pioneering and groundbreaking and all of that. So Sally, you are definitely a star, and we're thrilled to be here with you. As Sally said, my name is Zach Hiner. I'm the executive director of the Survivors Network of Those Abused by Priests, and I'm joined by my colleague, Melanie Sakoda. Melanie, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Melanie Sakoda, and as Zach said, Zach and Sally said, I work for SNAP as a survivor support coordinator, and I'm happy to be here today. I've been working in victim advocacy since '99.
Thanks, Melanie. I've got a little bit of a presentation to show folks here, so I'm going to share my screen. But while I'm doing that, I would be remiss if I do not recognize that I am calling in from Chicago, which is the traditional unceded homelands of the Council of the Three Fires, the Ojibwe, the Odawa, and the Potawatomi nations. So I'm grateful to be able to recognize those folks as we get into this presentation. So I believe, let me know if you can see are you looking at my notes, or are you looking at the?
I can see the screen, yeah.
Okay, wonderful, thank you. I never successfully do this, so that's great to know. But today we're gonna be talking about Catholic sex abuse in the United States. We're going to be talking about the issue of clergy sexual abuse from a Roman Catholic lens. We're going to be talking about breaking it up into kind of three parts here. We're going to be looking at a bit of the history, and then the scope and prevalence, and then some reactions and pathways forward. So one real quick caveat I want to get into before we talk about the scope of this is just about, when we talk about the issue of sexual violence, childhood sexual abuse specifically, we are impeded by reporting trends related to child sexual abuse when we talk about data. So it's really important to know that sexual violence is one of the most unreported crimes in the world. Estimates vary, but it's between 75% and 90% of crimes go unreported. So it's really important to keep that in mind, that when we are looking at the numbers I will be presenting, these are but a fraction of the problem. So a lot of extrapolation estimation comes from these. Melanie, before I get into that, I want to kick it over to you so you can bring it to the Coptic perspective.
Okay. I just wanted to start with saying that there are three reasons why Coptic survivors and Coptic supporters of survivors should be concerned about what happened in the Catholic Church. One reason is because the sexual abuse of children in the Catholic Church has been a known problem since the 1st century. Now, as far as I understand, the Oriental Orthodox churches, of which the Coptic Church is one, were part of the Catholic Church until 451 AD. which means that some of the attitudes and means of handling sexual abuse cases are probably shared with the Coptic hierarchy. Second is that the Catholic Church's wealth and power have enabled it to influence laws in the United States, specifically statute of limitations, which keeps a lid on knowledge about the extent of the problem. Unfortunately, it doesn't just affect Catholic cases, it affects Coptic cases too. As for example, Sally was unable to move forward with a lawsuit in Florida because of the statute of limitations. And the third thing is that what the Catholic survivors have done is a template for what Coptic survivors can do to move forward. And back to you, Zach.
Perfect. Thank you, Melanie. I appreciate you bringing that in.
I just want to say real quick that Melanie is also one of my directors on the Coptic Survivor Board. And so I just want to recognize that and thank you, Melanie, for everything that you've brought to the table for Coptic Survivor that you gained and learned from SNAP. I appreciate you. So thank you. Sorry,
That's
Zach,
awesome.
go ahead.
No, you're fine. No apologies whatsoever. Always good to hear about it. It's great work people are doing.
And
Okay,
sorry,
so
one more time, sorry, before we, so sorry. I just want to remind everybody that we are on Instagram Live for whoever is on Zoom. We are also on Instagram Live. So if you're unable to join through Zoom, we are here. If you do have questions on Instagram Live, I'm watching. And Zach, I will let you know if we get any questions on this end. Sorry for interrupting you last time. Thank you.
you are good. No worries. Okay, folks. So jumping ahead, before I talk a little bit about the scope and the numbers, just want to talk a little bit about a timeline of this scandal in the United States. As Melanie mentioned, this has been an extant problem within the Catholic Church for literally centuries. So I'm just going to kind of talk about the past couple of decades and how that has brought us to today. But it sort of kicks off in 1983, if you will, with the case of Father Gilbert Gauthier. And this is really the first major, widely publicized case of serial sex abuse by a Catholic priest in the United States. And Father Gauthier was a priest in the Diocese of Lafayette, Louisiana. To date, he has been accused of abusing hundreds of children. I think the number is above 300 now. He was in fact criminally convicted in 1985 of sexually abusing 37 children, at which point he became the first priest in the United States to be criminally charged and convicted for sexual abuse of children. Somewhat sadly, that remains as elusive today as it was in the 1980s. But Gauthier is really a kind of extreme case. Obviously with as many children as he abused, it's a massive one. And he eventually he did accept a plea deal. He was convicted of 20 years. He served 10. He was released left Louisiana, went to Texas, where he later reoffended in 1997. So it's another example too of those issues that childhood sexual abuse, sexual predation of children, sexual violence. This is something that just goes away. Perpetrators don't age out of it. They don't go away from it. It is a constant issue for children and parents to be afraid of. Now, if this is something that folks want to know more about, the Gauthier case, it is really ranging. I can't possibly do it justice here. There's a great book called Lead Us Not Into Temptation by a then New Orleans journalist named Jason Berry. He's written many books, but Lead Us Not Into Temptation is a very, very good breakdown of that horrific case. Now, 17 years after Gauthier went to jail was the next major update, really, in this scandal. And that one is one that folks are probably more familiar with. This has been immortalized in the Oscar-winning film Spotlight, but the Boston Globe's Spotlight Investigations team did uncover, myriad crimes and most importantly, cover up within the Archdiocese of Boston as they looked into the cases of abusive priests within that archdiocese, most specifically and famously those of John Gagan and Paul Shanley. But the big thing that the Spotlight team really uncovered was the concerted cover-up, the hierarchy's actions to pressure families and victims into staying silent, to pressure police departments not to pursue criminal charges and to refer any complaints of abuse back into the church. So this was a massive breakdown. Post Gauthier, I think the church was able to say, hey, that was just one horrible human being down there in the South. After Boston, it became clear things were a lot more systemic. And because of that, the church had to immediately react. And so in 2002, the bishops met following this scandal, and the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, USCCB, they met in Dallas, Texas. And at that time, they created what was called the Charter for the Protection of Children and Young People, which colloquially is just called the Charter or the Dallas Charter. And what this was, is this is a document that these bishops created that was aimed at creating quote unquote safe environments for children and parishioners within churches. And it mandated, among other things, zero tolerance policy on abuse, background checks for all volunteers, mandated the training of church leaders and staff on child sexual abuse prevention, and additionally a requirement that all future allegations of abuse would be turned over immediately to civil authorities. Now, we're going to be talking a little bit about this later in how these provisions aren't really as ironclad as they may have seemed. And one thing that's a bit notable is that in this report, it was exclusively about priests, diocesan employees, lay participants in the church. There was nothing whatsoever in the Dallas Charter about bishops and their responsibilities. So that's something we'll talk about a little bit later too. 2004. So in 2002, the church, again, this is a massive scandal. They're trying to get a grip on it. Part of getting a grip on it is trying to understand how big of a problem this really is. So the church commissions a study from the John Jay College of Criminal Justice in New York. And now they've created, in 2004, they published what's called the John Jay Study. And I'm going to talk about a lot of these findings in the next couple of slides when we go up the numbers. 2007, we had the largest settlement to date in the Archdiocese of Los Angeles. And so this was a settlement that was able to be brought about, sort of as Melanie alluded to some civil statute of limitations reform, and a window legislation was opened in California that allowed these cases to be brought forward. And so it created a settlement in which more than 500 victims were paid out a total of $660 million because of allegations of abuse and the mishandling by hierarchs. Now, what's critical here isn't that number. I mean, it's a big number, obviously, but what critical is here is that is the largest acknowledgement of wrongdoing by a Catholic entity to date. So by formally entering this settlement, they said, yeah, things happened, that was on us, here's proof of it. So that was a big deal. Civil, though. Now, criminally, it's been a lot harder to come by. And in 2012, we have Bishop Robert Finn. He, at the time of Kansas City, Missouri, became the first United States bishop convicted of failing to report child abuse. Now, again, this is 10 years post Boston. It's clear that this has been a problem for a long time and is endemic within the institution. But what happened in this case was there was a parish priest in Kansas City, Missouri, named Father Sean Radigan. And Father Sean Radigan was known by teachers, parents, and other school workers at the school he was assigned to be producing and downloading child pornography. Multiple people reported what Radigan was doing to Bishop Finn. Bishop Finn met with Radigan, took a look at his laptop where he saw the images that he had been downloading on school servers, as well as producing of children who were at that school, and gave him the laptop back. 5 months later, he decided to report what he had seen to police. During those 5 months, however, Radigan went on to produce more images of more children at that school. So it's really a disturbing case. And what's most disturbing about it to me was that Bishop Finn was only convicted of a misdemeanor failure to report. It had nothing. That was a suspended probation. He did lose. He is no longer a bishop. At last check, he was running a nunnery in one of the Plain States. But that was a sign that a lot more had to come in terms of understanding how the hierarchy covers up these crimes. Now, in 2018, another reason why this story has popped back up into the news these past few years was the Attorney General report released by Pennsylvania's Attorney General Josh Shapiro in 2018. And what he identified in his analysis of 6 dioceses in Western Pennsylvania, most of them very small. The only one that people would probably know is the Archdiocese of Pittsburgh. But in that report, he found that 300 children had been abused by more than 1,000 predator priests, or excuse me, vice versa. 1,000 children had been abused by more than 300 priests. But the critical part, again, here was that A.G. Shapiro was able to nail down that there was a clear playbook, a clear way that church hierarchs were trained to respond to allegations of abuse. And we'll talk about this a little bit later as well. We'll dive into that. But following this report, this was really a big one. Previous reports had come out and sort of come and gone, and people said, wow, that was awful, and then sort of moved on. This one really gained media attention, public attention, and importantly, political attention. And following A.G. Shapiro's report, dozens of other attorneys general around the country launched their own investigations into clergy sex abuse within their states. Some of those investigations were much more cursory, like Missouri and Florida, for example, they launched document reviews. But some states like Michigan and Maryland, for example, are launching very robust investigations that have resulted in arrests, a lot of information coming forward, and will result in reports to the public, which will be most interesting as all to learn about. So that was a big step forward that led to what I'm going to call the most recent thing, which would be in 2021, ex-Cardinal Theodore McCarrick was criminally charged with sexually abusing a child. And this name might be a little bit more common. Ted McCarrick was a prince of the church. He was a fundraising guru. He was a charismatic leader, and he had launched up the Catholic hierarchy's ladder. And throughout his career, he was sexually abusing seminarians and also children. The report that the Vatican commissioned into Ted McCarrick showed that multiple different church leaders at the highest level were aware of what Ted McCarrick was doing, including his close friend, Pope John Paul II. The report basically laid blame at Pope John Paul II's feet alone for McCarrick's ability to continue to work within the church and continue to abuse within the church. Now, obviously, that's an internal report, and it's easy for them to blame a dead man. But there's a lot more that goes into that. But what's critical here is, as I mentioned, Bishop Finn got a few months of probation for a failure to report. This is a big deal. A cardinal being criminally charged in the United States and of sexual abuse himself. It has, cases are moving slowly post-COVID world that we live in, but this is a big deal and we're monitoring it very closely. So at that, I'm going to kind of jump over a little bit into the scope and talk a little bit about the numbers as we know them and what they actually mean. But so in order to get, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So sorry, Zach. I just want to tell everyone on Instagram Live that if you guys have any questions, let's save them till the end. And I'm happy to bring you guys on the same way that we would on Zoom. So let's just wait until Zach's presentation is finished, and then you're free to request to join. Thank you. Sorry, Zach.
Well, thank you. Thank you, so that's helpful. So when we're going to get a handle on the scope, the first thing I'm going to do is go to that study I mentioned, the one that was commissioned by the church itself, the John Jay study. And in that, we had kind of a awkwardly round number of 11,000 total allegations of sexual abuse were reported to the bishops. One bit, no, I apologize, I'm jumping around, but an important note about this study is that it was a survey presented by the researchers from John Jay to bishops. It was voluntary. It was strongly encouraged that bishops and eparchs fill out the survey as best as their knowledge, but there were no enforcement mechanisms. So keep that in mind a little bit. But now of those 11,000 total allegations reported in the John Jay study, 3,300 of them were not investigated at all because the accused priest in question had passed away by the time the study was commissioned. 6,700 of those allegations had been substantiated, and the remaining 1,000 of them could not be substantiated. So this led to an extrapolation in the report that 61% of abuse reports to the church would be found credible. Now, I want to take a quick aside to discuss that term credible. You hear this a lot when we're talking about clergy sexual abuse, especially in terms of review boards and bishops and all that. But this is a barometer that the USCCB decided would be used by bishops in determining, the truth of allegations. One of the problems with it is that there is no real set standard. It's pretty much up to each bishop and their review board to determine for themselves what they consider credible and what they don't. And when I talk about the Illinois Attorney General report later, you'll see why this is such a problem. But before I move on, it's worth noting as well, those 1,000 allegations that were considered not substantiated, it's really important to make sure that I say it. Those were not all 1,000 allegations that were determined to be false. In fact, Kathleen McChesney, who was the first executive director of the Office of Child and Youth Protection that the USCCB created, so the woman in charge of the department when this study was released, made it a point to say false reporting of sexual abuse by children is very rare. Of the 1,000 allegations that were not substantiated, the researchers at John Jay concluded that 83 of them were false. So that means, 917 others were unsubstantiated for what? For what reason? We don't know. Obviously, it affects the numbers and the percentages and all that, but so. Now, when we're going back as well, not just looking at the number of allegations, but another big number that folks wanted to find out were what's the number of abusers, currently working, right? And so when they were doing this, John Jay used two different studies to try to get the number of total priests working and how many of them have been accused. So the first is the number that was reported to them by bishops and eparchs through the survey that they put out. And so that survey, showed there were approximately 110,000 priests over the past 52 years that the survey covered. And of them, 4,392 had been credibly abused, so about 4%, right? They also used numbers that were reported by a group called the Center for Applied Research into the Apostolate, or CARA. That's a research wing at Georgetown University into the Catholic Church. CARA had slightly different numbers out of 42 years and 94,000 plus priests. 4,127 of them had been credibly accused, or about 4.4%. So of these priests, the latter number that CARA used, 252, or approximately 1/4 of the credibly accused were ever arrested, and less than 100 of those priests were jailed. So that speaks to the significant problem that survivors face when coming forward that is, largely imposed on them by criminal and civil statute of limitations. And given so many victims of sexual violence do not come forward until many years later in life, these SOL barriers were massive, especially during this time. Now, post-2002, most states have undertaken the effort to reform their criminal statute of limitations, but work still remains to be done on that front, and civil still lags way behind. But so anyway, what this study is basically saying is that using church sources, 4% of priests working are abusers. So we're going to take a bit of issue with this because when we look at public releases, these numbers look a lot different. And so I'm going to show you three separate examples here of numbers that were gleaned through attorneys general reports, through civil settlements, and other kind of lawsuits. So these are numbers that have been created through these, sort of secular processes. And in Providence, Rhode Island, this diocese, over the course of 35 years and 1,200 diocesan and religious order priests who worked there, 125 priests there were accused, for about 10% of the total number. Diocese of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, now this was a Attorney General report there. They looked at numbers over 38 years and a little bit more than 2,200 priests. 169 there were accused, or 7.7%. And then in Covington, Kentucky, this is a settlement, okay? Much, much smaller diocese, but 54 years and 364 total priests come out to 35 priests were credibly accused, or 9.6%, right? So these numbers, what we generally see, the 2018 PA report, that showed about, I think it was 8.9%. But what we generally see in secular numbers are between 8 and 10% abuse rates. And that number holds across things like Boy Scouts, public school teachers, et cetera. So there's obviously, the 4.4% reported by church officials is very low. And, when we talk about minimization and corruption, cover up, that might explain why some of those numbers are so low. Now, one thing that I found kind of interesting to look at as well is approximating the number of survivors. And when I get into this, it's kind of interesting because from 1950 to 2002, again, from the John Jay study, 10,667 survivors had been reported to bishops. Now, every year, post-charter, the USCCB puts out what's called an implementation report, but they go through and they look at how our dioceses around the country implementing the charter, and then they report on numbers of the number of accused priests, new survivors, et cetera. So what we're going to look at is how this number changes as these implementation reports come out. So 2002, 10,667. Between 2002 and 2016, relatively quiet years in terms of the clergy sex abuse scandal, we get up to 18,565 total survivors. Now, 2017 on, we start to get into kind of the Me Too era and attitudes about sexual violence. The zeitgeist is just much different. And we start to see that change. In 2017, there were 652 new survivors reported. So the total is now 19,000. 2018, 1,381. 2019, 4,220. And in 2020, the most recent year we have an implementation report, 3,946. So we've more than doubled the number of survivors that were ever reported over the course of, what is that, five decades to the church in just the past few years here. And so I think that speaks to, obviously a few things have changed, right? And about Roman Catholic sex abuse, right? The 2018 grand jury report was massive. As I mentioned, the general Me Too movement that just really made people think and talk about sexual violence, not just in against children or against in clerical situations, but just in general, really brought people forward. But most importantly, we have statute of limitations reform. And between 2017 and 2020, more than 20 states amended their statute of limitations to make it possible for survivors to be able to come forward and bring some cases. We saw states like Louisiana, Rhode Island, Vermont, New York, obviously. California's opened a second window. So in some states, amazing things are happening. In other states, a lot of work remains to be seen. And so this is just an example of why creating opportunities for survivors to come forward is so important. And this just shows how the number of abusers that the USCCB admits to is always going to continue to be growing. They currently estimate 2.6 victims per abuser. So by their own count, they're admitting to what, 14,000 there? So anyway, that's terrible math, but. So really quick, I want to talk about false reports again. And I know I don't need to say this to this group, but I'm going to say it because it bears mentioning for a reason. False reports are exceedingly rare, okay? And when we talk about this in an academic and research context, there's two very commonly reports that are cited that are still used today. And there's the 2 to 4% of reports being false comes from Everson and Boat in a study in 1989. And between 2 and 8% comes from a report by Mickelson, Guthiel, and Emmons. And it's critical to note that in both of these studies, the higher end of that false reporting is always due to custody disputes. So a divorce case that gets nasty and, someone falsely accuses one parent to get, custody. Anyway, so very, very, very rare, right? So that makes this graph from the latest implementation report from the USCCB, to me, fascinating. I just saw this. This is a very formed thought, but I just saw this as I was preparing for this presentation. And this graph shows the number of allegations that was made by children in recent years, and then the number of how many of those were determined to be substantiated, right? And so the USCCB is reporting that in 2016, they had a false allegation report of 88%. In 2017, 71 in 2018, 76 in 2019, 73% in 2020. So why are the numbers reported by the USCCB so completely out of line with established reporting trends, right? Either Catholic parents are raising children that lie at an order of magnitude greater than any other child in the country, or something stinks with the USCCB's ability to receive, investigate, and adjudicate what these reports really mean, right? So I'll leave the audience to ponder that on their own, especially as we talk about the issue of minimization and cover-up. So Melanie, really quick, I want to make sure to give you an opportunity to bring it home.
Okay, I'm just going to briefly talk about what might the scope of abuse be in the Coptic Church. And I think, as Zach pointed out, probably the 8 to 10% of priests abusing Coptic children will probably hold. But there's no clear answer to this question. And one of the reasons is that none of the Orthodox churches have produced any statistics about abuse within their jurisdictions. But one of the things you will find is that the Orthodox churches, which of course allow married clergy, are going to say, oh, we don't have that problem. It's because of the celibacy requirement. There are some people, or there is some support for that in the, when clergy celibacy in the Catholic Church was studied, notably by Richard Sipe, he found that 50% of Catholic clergy were not adhering to their vows. And of those, his final estimate was, I believe, 9% of clergy were abusing children. But what that meant was that you had another, maybe 40 to 41% who had something to hide. And there is some speculation that this has influenced, this is an influence in the Catholic Church. And if it was not for the celibacy requirement, there would be fewer abusers. Now, to counter this, in general, among child sex abuse survivors overall, the majority of abuse is perpetrated by heterosexual males in relationships with adult women, fathers, stepfathers, boyfriends. So what you have perhaps in the Orthodox churches, the Baptist communities, other Protestant churches, is a higher percentage of people who may be likely to abuse children. And one of the things to keep in mind is that in religious organizations that have married clergy, you not only have the normal deference given to a clergy person, but if that person is also a husband and a father, you have an extra level of trust. So there are some people that think it's possible that if the truth would ever finally come out in these other jurisdictions, that the number of abusers would rise beyond 10%. But we won't know. And that's part of what I think Coptic survivors should be doing, is pressuring their church to start releasing some of this data.
Yes, excellent. Thank you, Melanie. Great points.
I
Okay.
have a question.
Oh, go ahead, Sally.
Melanie, what do you have any advice of how we can get them to produce those reports? Because they are not budging. It looks like Coptic Survivor is the one that's going to have to produce those reports.
I think you have to do what the Catholics have done, which is you work with the media, you produce your own information.
Mm-hmm.
And secondly, you work to make sure that governmental entities are investigating not just Catholics' clergy abuse, but clergy abuse in all other religions and institutions.
Thank you, Melanie. Sorry, Zach.
You're fine, no apologies at all. Okay, so jumping into the next section, the minimization and cover up, right? And this is gonna, I think, help us understand a little bit more about those numbers we just looked at. But one thing I always like to start when we're looking at this is, people jumped to 2002 in Boston, but simultaneously in 2002, reporters at the Dallas Morning News were also looking into this problem. And Brooks Edgerton and Reese Dunklin are the reporters today. I don't think either are still with the Dallas Morning News today, but they did a really great job. And the John Jay report that was released pointed at a failure by the Roman Catholic hierarchy in the United States to not only grasp the seriousness of the problem, but they placed an overemphasis on the need to avoid scandal and the use of unqualified people, whether it be other priests or lay people within their organization, to try to treat and solve the crisis that way. And so that's what the John Jay study pointed at. Well, 2 years before that was released, that's kind of what Reese and Brooks came down to as well, was that there was a overemphasis on avoiding scandal. And because of that, I put this quote from their story up on there, but you can see, they found that at the time in 2002, at least 2/3 of Catholic bishops and leaders across the country had allowed accused priests to keep working. So same kind of thing. And again, when the focus was on Boston, and was saying, oh, this is Archdiocese of Boston problem. But this story early on showed that it was a national issue, but it didn't get enough attention. But I'd like to give them a little bit of credit because they pointed to this being a national issue early on. And when we talk about the issue of minimization and cover up, it's always sort of colloquially been understood, right, that church officials would put pressure on victims, they would put pressure on their families, and there would be pressure on the communities. But it wasn't until 2018 where this really became a lot more structured in what was called in AG Josh Shapiro's report, the circle of secrecy. And every time I talk about the circle of secrecy, people are shocked to learn that it isn't survivors and it wasn't A.G. Shapiro who came up with this term, but it was in fact then Bishop Donald Wuerl, while he was working in Pittsburgh. He used this phrase in some internal documents that were uncovered when discussing moving accused priests around. But this circle of secrecy contains 7 distinct elements as determined, okay? First is the use of euphemisms. You might have seen this in a report where it says, one thing that particularly bothers me, for example, is high school teacher had sex with 14-year-old, student. In reality, the high school adult raped a teenager. But so that's sort of an example, right? They'll say things like a parish priest was moved because he had a boundary violation with a parishioner, or there was inappropriate contact. Another example would be how a priest going on leave would be called sick leave, even though they were on leave because they had sexually abused a child or an adult. Another element was deficient or biased diocesan investigation. So this would be someone reporting to the bishop, and the bishop being like, oh yeah, I'm totally going to investigate, look around, yep, no abused children here, we're good. So it's and another element of this is untrained support personnel for survivors who come forward. So in some cases, you'd have a vicar for clergy, someone whose job is to defend clergy, answering the phone and taking reports from survivors. Another element here is the treatment provider bias, which would be when church officials use church-run or church-aligned, quote unquote, treatment centers or psychological facilities where they would send abusive priests. And they could send them there so that then a couple years later, St. Luke's or wherever it might be would say, they're cured. They no longer have a predilection for children. You can take this priest back into the, into the fold and he'll be just fine. Obviously, we know that things like pedophilia are not cured. We know that there is no valid diagnostic tool to detect pedophilia. So obviously any sort of treatment center that's saying they've cured something needs to be looked at extra closely. Lack of public disclosure. This somewhat goes with, the use for euphemisms and the deficient investigations, but this would be just, failing to disclose whatsoever the crimes that these men had committed, whether in the parish that they had left or in the parish that they're coming from. And this is one element where you see the church using terms like retired or reassigned, which disarm parents and make them not think twice about why this pastor has come, from the other side of the country. Another element is financial support. So this would be continuing to fund abusive priests, keeping them on diocesan payroll, providing them with housing, transportation, benefit, and stipends. In some cases, this really just sort of left abusers with the money, resources, and time to find and abuse other kids without having to actually do their jobs in many ways. Transfer rather than removal. Obviously, this is the big one, an institution in which someone has told you, hey, your employee sexually assaulted a child or sexually assaulted that woman, they should be fired. Well, in the church, they transferred them and moved them around. We know that this was regular, we know this was systemic, and we know it was institutionalized. And most concerning is the fact that we know this is worldwide. Abusers are sent all around, whether within their own diocese or to other countries. So it really shows that the diaspora of this abusive problem is so much bigger than it could have really discovered in the first place. And then finally, insufficient reports to law enforcement, or the idea that a bishop needs to tell police about a sexual abuse accusation they had. Well, that didn't grok. They didn't understand that, so they wouldn't report allegations of crimes. They would handle everything internally. And obviously, this is one of the main reasons why statute of limitations concern came up and hurt so many survivors, because the crimes were never reported in the first place, were never investigated, were never adjudicated. Here's an example of the circle of secrecy and some of the ways that it works out. And this one's from Illinois. This is contemporaneous with A.G. Shapiro's work. So at the time, our Attorney General was a woman named Lisa Madigan, and she had been looking into the issue of Catholic sex abuse in her state. And this to me, this quote sort of helps determine why the number of allegations that were in the John Jay report were considered unsubstantiated. I'll take a look at this quote. When the Illinois diocese investigated an allegation, they frequently found reasons not to deem the allegation credible or substantiated. In the office's review of clergy files, a pattern emerged where diocese frequently failed to substantiate an allegation when it came from one survivor, or even if they had reasons to believe that survivor, and they often found reasons to discredit survivors' stories of abuse by focusing on their personal lives. So to give you some numbers here, when A.G. Madigan was investigating the Illinois diocese, at that time, the 6 dioceses in our state had previously publicly disclosed credible allegations against 185 priests. A.G. Madigan's review discovered that there were, in fact, allegations against 690 total priests that had been substantiated. And so if the John J. percentage of 61% substantiated reports are accurate, that would mean that Illinois officials should have disclosed 421 priests, not 185. So this quote, though, is really illustrative about how they were able to pare that number down all the way to 185. I mean, if a survivor was homeless, if a survivor had drug issues, if a survivor had histories of mental health problems, joblessness, they would say, obviously, they're lying to get a paycheck. In fact, all of those are markers of trauma suffered as a child. So those would help substantiate what these survivors were saying. And church officials use these to say they were just liars looking for money. And so I think this is a perfect example of how lack of training, lack of knowledge about trauma, and letting bishops make these ultimate decisions is a failure. Now, I've been talking pretty much entirely about the US, but I wanted to break out just a little bit to talk a little bit about the worldwide phenomenon of this. And in Cologne, they had Cologne, Germany. It's one of the largest, I think it is the largest diocese in Germany. They had a report released in March 2021. In that, they determined there were at least 314 victims, at least 202 abusers. But most notably, it found that there were at least 75 instances of quote unquote mishandling, which had been attributed to previous leaders of the church. And here, this quote from the report, here's a perfect example why. This is a letter that a cardinal had written to a priest who had abused 6 children. He's telling this priest, I believe you. I've got your back, dude. Don't worry about those. This guy abused 6 kids, but the cardinal had his back. And I think that sort of helps to show how the brazenness of the abuse as it continued in all these different countries. The reason why it has been such a massive problem is because it was not treated as a problem by anybody with authority. And then also in 2021, a report was released in France. And that report was interesting for one big reason, which is that this is the only report release that I've seen that doesn't rely just on the true data that they've received, but it also does an extrapolation. And in this case, they extrapolated that there are at least 330,000 victims of clergy sexual abuse over the past 70 years in France, based on the number of allegations they received, the number of abusers that they found, and how those cases were treated. So I think this quote here to me, I thought was interesting. And then Jean-Marc Sauvé was the chairman, the commissioner of the independent committee behind this report. And he said what I think, has been so true in every case, in every situation where secular authorities have dug into clergy sex abuse. It is that there's a deep and cruel indifference towards victims. Victims are treated as liabilities, as potential payouts, as people who are going to say bad things about you. They are not looked at as children of the church. They're not looked at as parishioners. And I think that has been a worldwide issue here. With that, I'm going to kick it back over to Melanie really quick before we get into some of the reactions and responses.
I'm just going to say a little bit. There's a few notable investigations into clergy abuse around the world that did not focus just on Catholic abuse. There's the Royal Commission's report in Australia, and another one that's going on right now, I believe still in New Zealand and in Scotland. And what my takeaway from this is, why isn't this happening in the United States? And in recent years, well, SNAP has called for this for many years, but in the recent past, and particularly since Zach took over as the executive director of SNAP, we've been working on coalitions with other groups to not only perhaps call for a congressional investigation into child sex abuse in this country, but also that there are other reforms that the federal government could take that would help with the problem of child sex abuse across the board. And it's some of these things, if you go to an organization called Keep Kids Safe, of which SNAP is involved in, you can see some of the, I'm sorry, I'm totally blanking on the word. You can see some of the proposals as to what the federal government can do. So you might want to take a look at that, because this is another way, even though it's broader, that you will essentially end up helping help children who may be being sexually abused in the Coptic church.
Wow. Real quick, before we move to Zach, we have a couple of questions. I know we wanted to hold questions till the end, but Zach, what you were just discussing in the last slide, Lydia's asking, are there statistics or studies on the connection between enablers and abusers? And are enablers likely to be abusers themselves?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yes. So in terms of statistics on that, we haven't really, that hasn't quite been dug into. As you can see, most of the reports we're referencing here are internally begun. There's only been a couple. This French one was independent, but the Cologne one that I was previously talking about, that was an internal report. And so I do think there's an element of those kind of disclosures. They don't want to really look necessarily at the hierarchy too much in that way, but one need only look at the case of Ted McCarrick to see how true that is, right? And he was known to be an abuser. The report that the Vatican released there's no question about it. I mean, multiple cardinals, the step below the Pope, repeatedly we're talking about Uncle Ted and telling seminarians don't hang out around Uncle Ted, kind of things like that. And knowledge had just worked its way all the way back up. It somewhat reminds me in a way of Hollywood and how Harvey Weinstein was known about his parties at the Four Seasons, and there's that quote from Courtney Love in like 1999, like Harvey Weinstein invites you to the Four Seasons, don't go. Like it was known about well before we knew about it, right? So I think that is coming, and I do know Melanie mentioned New Zealand. It's called the faith-based care is the shorthand for it, but they're looking specifically into the promotion of abusers within institutions, and they're not just focused on the Catholic Church, as Melanie mentioned.
Oh, thank you, Zach.
Okay, cool. So next up. So when we talk about reactions and responses, one of the most common is why. Why is this such a problem within this institution, right? So what are the potential reasons for this scandal? First, we can look at individual level factors, right? The fact is the priesthood provides access to vulnerable populations. It is a job somewhat like a special ed teacher, a sports coach, those kind of things that predators are known to look for because of the access they provide. So, there is also the element of power imbalance. Priests have, kind of a stabilizing effect for some communities, right? Especially those communities that are a little bit poorer, maybe more immigrant communities. It's a power structure that people understand and glom onto. And so you see this a lot in cases where a single mother would drop her son off. This is actually a situation here in Chicago. But a single mother would drop her son off to be the evening maintenance at the local school, because she had to go to work. There was nowhere else for the son to go. The church was providing him an avenue to keep him out of trouble. Instead, he was being violently raped by his priest, right? And the mother would never have looked sideways at him, because in their country, you don't question priests. So that's one, I think, individual level factor that's prominent here. There's also, as we've discussed, the institutional enabling of abuse and a dedication to the reputation of the church. And now I want to be real quick on the reputation of the church. This is not just a Catholic Church issue, right? We know that sexual abuse is a problem within pretty much every institution that operates within our country, at the very least. And I can say this as a graduate of Michigan State University, for those of you who are familiar with the Larry Nassar scandal. The immediate response from Michigan State University was not to say, we employed this guy, we made a mistake, our bad, what can we do? It was to say, actually, it was US Gymnastics' fault. We did everything right at MSU, leave us alone. That desire to protect the reputation of the institution, reputations are why institutions have power, right? So that it somewhat makes logical sense that that's there. But again, when we're talking about sexual crimes committed against vulnerable people, anyway, there's obviously a desire to prevent the erosion of moral authority. This is so critical within churches. If you're not, where people look to for what is right and wrong and help me guide through these philosophical conundra I face on a daily basis, then what do you have? Additionally, this is the problem that's most pointed to by Catholic scholars, is what's called clericalism. Clericalism is specifically kind of an outmoded belief. Pope Francis believes that clericalism is the worst thing in the world, for example. But it is when priests view themselves as superior and above their parishioners. And this somewhat comes again. A pope is what? Jesus's voice on earth, right? So everybody he appoints comes down from Christ's voice in a way. And so that led to, and especially these devout communities, somewhat elevate priests to this standard to begin with. And so that led to this sort of cyclical nature of priests believe that they're above those who've been befriended, who they've been, employed to serve. And the defeat of clericalism, the chance to make sure that priests know you are serving, you are not above, you are below. That's been a major effort of the church theologically to try to prevent this. But it is, that is an internal specific reason. Now, obviously, there has been some reform within the church, and I would be remiss if I did not mention what they have attempted to do to curb this issue. And obviously, the creation of the charter and the creation of the zero tolerance policy was an important step, was an important signal. They additionally also created their own prevention and prevention training curriculum called Virtus. Again, you might remember I said that prevention training was mandated by the charter. One of the caveats was where you get that training, to what extent you train your staff, and how often you retrain them was not. So there are some dioceses that take this very seriously. There are others that consider a 30-minute, training once to be good enough. So there's a lot that remains to be done with the training aspect. The creation of lay review boards, this is another idea that I think was a very good one that has been somewhat bowdlerized by its implementation, but the desire was for there to be boards that at least had 5 community members who were members of the church, but also, somewhat external to it, so they could help review allegations that were brought forward. So it wasn't all on the bishop's shoulders to determine for himself credibility. It's a good idea. The problem is, again, is its implementation. Not all dioceses even have to say who is on their review board. So they could just pick, 5 random people they know are going to say yes and put them on there, and no one ever knows. Some here in Chicago, our archdiocese has a lot of problems, but they have at least made it known who is on their lay review board. One other issue, the biggest issue with them really, is that lay review boards have no authority. They can say whatever they want. They could tell the bishop, this is definitely a substantiated allegation, we've got to do something. And the bishop can say, thanks for your input, and decide the other way. Bishops are princes of their kingdoms. They have ultimate authority over their areas. So a review board is a good idea in theory, but they need to have some sort of actual authority for it to matter. Additionally, so releasing the name of accused clerics. This is something I really want to point out. This was a major win in that Archdiocese of Los Angeles settlement I mentioned earlier. A critical element to getting the survivors to agree was making the church willing to release the men who had abused them. And the church fought very hard against that. But in the past 17 years since that settlement, this has become a lot more common. I think we're up to around 170 of the nation's 187 dioceses have released lists. So it's a good, again, first step. The problem comes in when you actually start to look at these lists, and they exclude names for reasons that are often murky or just flat out cannot be explained. Some dioceses, some major ones, such as the Archdiocese of San Francisco or the Archdiocese of Military Services, have yet to produce a list and have no plans to do so. The latter being especially concerning when you think about the diaspora of American military bases around not only the country, but the world. That is where, I mean, that's where an abuser could theoretically be placed by another diocese, go to Germany, go to Kuwait, whatever it is, and not be known. So we really want these lists to be released. We think it's very important to make sure that not only are current parents and parishioners aware of the history of the men who might be teaching them, but it's critical for survivors and their healing as well. In that, one example that a colleague has always said to me is like, a survivor would say they were abused by Father Mac in Boston. But Mac is such a common nickname, you know. Is it Father McGillicuddy? Was it Father McNamara? Was it Father Mac Johnson? You know, it's tough. So what these lists need to do is they need to contain their full names, they need to contain their full work histories, they need to contain their photos, and they need to contain some sort of element of, you know, were they abusing just boys? Were they abusing girls? Were they abusing, you know, it helps survivors recognize that was the Father Mac I was talking about. He abused me. You know, it's very important for folks to be able to point to that. And it's kind of funny because there was a bishop, his name is Bishop Persico in the Diocese of Erie, who fought really hard actually in when he released his list following the AG Shapiro's reports. Obviously, he doesn't get a ton of credit for doing it in advance, but he made the point afterwards that others should do it as well. He said, some are concerned that publicizing these names will open old wounds. Very importantly, we were actually publishing the names in the hope of opening those wounds and helping the victim survivors move one step closer to healing them. It's important that they know that they're not alone. I think that's a really important and accurate quote from a church official. Finally, most recently, in 2019, Pope Francis held the first ever Papal Abuse Summit, in which cardinals from around the world gathered in Rome to discuss this as a worldwide crisis. The Pope created what was called Vos Extus Lux Mundi, which means you are the light of the world. And what this does was formally promulgated to every single bishop and cardinal in the country that when they receive allegations of abuse, they do in fact have to report it. Report to whom? Internally, to the CDF, of course, but they have to report. This was hailed. I mean, I don't know if you guys saw the media coverage in 2019, but everybody was clapping Pope Francis on the back as solving the abuse crisis. You know, you did it. Obviously, he didn't. This was a lot of words that didn't mean a lot, especially in a country here like the US, where, you know, we have been grappling with this issue publicly for decades. For other countries where, you know, where abuse of children might not even still be considered a thing, it might have been a step forward. But for most places, we aren't happy about this. And Vos Estis is quietly set to expire later this year. There has been no information whatsoever on movement forward. Oh, and of course, how could I forget the Bishop Reporting Service in 2020? The USCCB put this in. This was to specifically kind of the question you asked a little bit about, Sally, was for folks to specifically report abuse perpetrated by bishops or cardinals. The previous issue was, I can't report to the church that the bishop in charge who sexually abused me, and no one would care. So they created what they called the Bishop Reporting Service. This is kind of nebulous. It goes to a third-party reporting service when someone makes a report. We don't really know what happens to that third-party report. Who does it go? Does it go to the Papal Nuncio? Does it go to local law enforcement? Not quite clear. We do know for example, that this is really important. Archbishop Joseph Hart, who was from the Diocese of Kansas City, Missouri, later the Diocese of Cheyenne, Wyoming. He had been acknowledged to be an abuser for something like 20 years, but no one would investigate him because he was in charge of his diocese. It was only when he retired that his predecessor, in fact, turned over all records and allegations to local police and said, this needs to be looked into. So Bishop Stephen Biegler in Cheyenne, Wyoming is one of the young up and coming hierarchs who gets a little bit of credit, but clearly there are a lot that remains to be done. But what remains to be done, what we care about, is done on the secular side of things. The church can do all kinds of internal reform that they want. It doesn't mean a whole ton to me where I sit. Where I sit is having federal government and state government get involved in this issue. And so several ways that they can do that. One are by mandating sexual abuse prevention training for everybody within an institution that works with children, young people, anybody. I mean, sexual abuse is not just an issue related to children, right? Everyone who is in an institution that works with people should have to do this. Our country is moving a lot closer to becoming trauma informed throughout our workplaces and schools, but we have a long way to go. So this would solve the church's use whatever prevention you want, whatever prevention training you want, by saying it has to be evidence-based, it has to be, based on prevention and intervention practices, and it sets a standard. And I really think it's important for a standard to be set in this. As Melanie alluded to earlier, reforming statute of limitations, both the elimination of criminal and the elimination of civil is what we want to see. And we also want to see the opening of permanent revival windows, meaning a survivor whose case was previously time barred, it never should be time barred. There should be no reason whatsoever that they cannot bring a civil case forward. So we believe there should be permanent revival windows open. An excellent example of this is Vermont, which just 2 years ago eliminated every single statute of limitation they had related to childhood sexual abuse and sexual violence writ large. They now have a permanent revival window open. There is no point at time at which a survivor would report and say, sorry, there's nothing we can do from you. That should not just be for people in Vermont. That should be for everybody in this country and indeed the world. Strengthening mandated reporting laws. This is one, people go back and forth on this. Mandated reporting, in my opinion, is very important. I think everybody who works with children should be a mandated reporter. And I think that where it comes, the church has a bit of a wonky issue here where they claim what's called clergy penitent privilege. So if someone tells them of a crime that was committed in the guise of confession, they don't have to turn that over despite being a mandated reporter. I believe the clergy penitent privilege should be excised from our laws and that it should not exist. This was actually used 2016, I think, is the date of the case, but there was an absolutely horrific case of serial sexual abuse within the Mormon church in New Mexico. This entire church community was aware that a father was molesting his 2 young girls because he had gone to confess to his bishop. That's what they call priests in the Latter-day Saints. He had gone to confess to his bishop that he was molesting his daughters. They stayed with him for another 4 years because no one reported to the police what happened, because he was trying to work this through the church. That should never happen. That should never happen. Finally, as Melanie referenced, and what we're doing with the Keep Kids Safe movement that I'm so excited about is a federal level investigation into any institution that enables and covers up abuse. This should go through every single church that operates in this country. This should go through every single youth group that operates in this country. And as we've seen, it sadly has to go through our universities and school systems too. But if our Congress can spend the time to investigate steroids in baseball, they can investigate crimes committed against children and women by people who are supposed to be protecting them. I think we're getting closer to a country that is recognizing the importance of this. And I think the Attorney's General investigation in those states was a start towards getting our federal level officials to accept they have a level of responsibility. But additional things that they could do, in an investigation like this would be to determine if a institution like a church had covered up abuse, yank their 501c3 status away, make them not a nonprofit anymore. I mean, there's so many kind of steps, as Melanie was alluding to, that the federal government can take that they just have yet to. And I really think this is an example of what we all need to be doing. Unfortunately, all of the reforms, all of the work forward that has come in this country has been on the backs and shoulders of survivors. And it's unfortunate that once again, survivors have to lead us into the future here. But I really think this is what we can, and allies like I can add our voice to that of survivors to say, hey, what we want is to make sure every institution that's taking care of these people is investigated. Like Melanie mentioned, myriad other countries have done this. It's time for it to happen here in the United States as well. So with that, that's the end of my spiel. Happy to answer any and all questions, but I know Melanie has something to bring us home.
I would just say, and it's one thing that Zach didn't mention when he talked about the reforms that have been going on in the Catholic Church. But one of the things that they have done is to provide, like in Catholic schools, training to the children about what to do if they are being sexually abused by anyone. And I think probably of all the reforms that they've instituted, that may be the one that has the most potential to change the course of events. And along that same line, what you as parents or someone who loves children, that's one thing that all of you can do. You can learn to talk to children about what constitutes sexual abuse, have them learn the proper names for the different parts of their bodies, have them learn what's inappropriate and what isn't, and what to do about it if something like that happens to them. If you find out, from a child that you love that they are being abused, don't go to the church. Go to the police. If it's a crime, take it first to the police. And then you can report to the church if you want to, but don't leave it up to them to report to the police. And, if there's some reason, if it's an older survivor who's afraid to go, they're welcome to contact me. We talk people through this. I mean, it is their choice. It is the survivor's choice to go. Of course, if it's a child, it's the parent's choice. And I personally recommend that you immediately report. Don't wait.
Wow. Wow, you guys. The statistics, the work that you've done, I cannot. Coptic survivor is an infant in this. So I'm like, let me take notes from y'all, because this is just remarkable. I'm looking right now to see, I think we might have some people that want to come live with us and maybe ask you all some questions. Oh my God, I learned so much just now. Zach, we need to, can we like have a, I need y'all to train me. Can I get the training? Can I get the training? I also, while we're trying to see, trying to bring someone on here and have some of these questions answered, I want to also bring to everyone's attention that the annual SNAP conference is 1 month from now. I'm so excited about that. I'm going. I hope to see other Coptic survivors there, or just any survivors that have been following the movement there. This is going to be an amazing opportunity to just network with other amazing organizations, people that have been in the game way longer than Coptic survivors, so we can learn from them. It's just remarkable what you all have done for the past 30 plus years. Can you tell us a little bit more about the conference and how people can get involved and join?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So as Sally said, our conference this year is going to be from July 22nd to the 24th. We're in Denver, Colorado this year. So headed to the Golden State. I'm really, really excited about the slate of speakers that we have this year. We've got some old voices who've been in the movement for a long time, as well as some young up and coming voices. One example being Sarah Pearson from a group called Nate's Mission, who are going to come and talk sort of about the next evolution of work to uplift survivors and communities. So I'm really excited about it. If you want to find out more information about it, you can visit our website, snapnetwork.org. And then on the right-hand side of the page, there's a button that says conference. You can click that. The best part about that button is it has at the bottom a link that says, if you have any questions, please email Zach. So you could just click that and email me with literally any questions you might have about the conference, this presentation, or anything else. I'll also pop my email address in the chat for folks. But yeah, we would love to see you in Denver. This is our first in-person conference, obviously, since COVID sort of changed the way we all live and work. And these are really energizing experiences. I think it's just wonderful to get a network of survivors and advocates together who so care, together about moving forward on this issue. And it's energizing for me. I hope it is for those others who attend, and we would love to see you there.
Yeah.
I will just mention that if you are thinking about going and you want the SNAP rate for your hotel room, you need to make your reservation by Thursday, the 30th, I believe?
We actually extended it, because our conference coordinator, Becky, is an absolute hero. She was able to get it extended all the way until not next Thursday, but the Thursday after. So you have 2 weeks to make your decision.
Okay, so registration closes, what's the date?
Registration doesn't close. You can register at the conference itself, but if you want the special discounted hotel rate, that ends on July 7th.
Okay. Okay. I'm just typing for everyone in here.
Sure.
Discount rate deadline is July what? I'm sorry.
7th.
July 7th is the, yep, that's the drop dead date.
Okay. Okay, and then they have, so you all now have the website to register to join the SNAP conference, the deadline, and then you can also, okay, sorry, I'm just getting messages and stuff.
No worries.
You can also, yeah, so you register at the website that I provided, and then you'd also, don't forget that you would have to book your own hotel. We have some questions. Gina's asking, why do you think, or do you know why it was relatively easier to get a civil case conviction from a criminal one?
Why it's easy. Well, and Melanie is an attorney, so I'll let her jump in and correct everything dumb that I say.
I'm
But
not
I think,
I'm not quite sure. Can she explain what she means?
Yeah.
Does she mean why it's easier to have a civil lawsuit after someone's been criminally convicted?
because
Or
it's
why
easy.
it's,
Yeah,
why it's
Gina-
harder to pursue criminal charges?
Well, Gina, if you can elaborate on that, if you're still here and can elaborate, we can answer your question. She also asked, and do the review boards have any credential requirements?
Oh, that's a fabulous question. The answer is no. Again, it depends on a local, diocesan decision, but within the charter, it is written that the requirements for review boards are that there have to be at least 5 community members. They have to be practicing Catholics within that archdiocese, and they have to have professional background in either children, investigations, or trauma. So that could mean, a school teacher would qualify, right? And I'm not trying to besmirch a profession here. I'm not saying like it's wrong to have a school teacher in a review board. I'm just saying like when people hear that, they often think, oh, we're talking about former prosecutors, former police officers, a sexual assault therapist, and that's really not the case.
Yeah. I think Gina was trying to join, but we're having technical difficulties. But I hope that answers part of her question. I think what she's trying to ask is
why it's easier to bring a civil suit. That was kind of how it sounded to me. And that, again, unfortunately goes back to statute of limitations concerns, and what happened. Melanie, you talk about Stogner via California. You can
Okay.
to me.
In the early 2000s, California tried a very innovative approach to changing, not changing the criminal statute of limitations entirely, but eliminating it so that if you committed a crime in 1975, you could be prosecuted for that crime. You would have the punishment that was enacted in 75, but you could bring the criminal charges at some point in the future. Unfortunately, the US Supreme Court in 2003 in the Stogner decision said, no, you can't do that. So what that means is that once you're timed out of the criminal statute of limitations, at least under current law, that's it, no help for you. However, they did allow for these look back windows. So in other words, retroactive changes to the civil statute of limitations, which is why these civil suits are very important in getting out information that you're not going to be able to get out through the criminal justice system.
And it's kind of a double-edged sword in that people don't, again, I'm not besmirching him. I don't, pay attention to the esoteric decisions and things that I don't read about regularly, but a lot of people don't really understand that it isn't possible to criminally prosecute a lot of these abusers. It is illegal to do so. And so survivors have often been besmirched as, oh, they're just going after money. They just want a payday, blah, 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 blah. But it's civil courts are the only avenue that most survivors have towards any sense of justice. And if you pay attention, for example, I'm going to keep going back to it, the Archdiocese of Los Angeles settlement, it was a massive point within that sticking. The Archdiocese of LA was offering more money to survivors if they would get rid of the requirement to publish the list of names of abusers. And all of those survivors of that complaint said, no, we want to make sure those names are public. People need to know that. We want to prevent other children from going through what they did. So people focus on the amount of money that survivors receive. And I can guarantee that no survivor is ever going to say the amount of money they received in a settlement makes up for the trauma and abuse that they experienced. So it's a very easy way that folks, try to dismiss our movements and our issues, but it doesn't really fit with reality.
Yeah. I want to talk about our only case really right now in court is in Northern California in the San Francisco Bay Area with Sameh, the survivor that is known now probably widely in the Coptic survivor movement. She was sexually assaulted by the current Coptic Pope's first cousin, who is the leader of Northern California and the Northwestern region. So I think he's over 4.5 states. The Pope gave him that power. And so what she did is she went to law enforcement. She tried to go through the criminal route. And, that was just, it's almost impossible. It's like, hey, do you have more victims? Well, now you have more victims. Do you have more evidence? Okay, we need more DNA. Okay, can you get him to confess? It's just, we got him to confess. It's an Arabic confession. They're like, we're not going to spend $6,000 translating your confession. This is true story. So it got to the point where she actually ended up getting, in that whole process, she ended up getting sued by her rapist for defamation. So then she went ahead and filed a civil suit. She doesn't want a dime. If she wins, she wants to donate all of it. She doesn't want to see a dime of it. I don't know any survivors at all that I've spoken to that want money. They just want justice. They don't want a dime. They actually, it's almost like, I feel like they feel like it's like the money is like, it's like tainted. Like, it's like, they don't even want anything to do with it. They just want their abuser thrown out. And I don't even think they're pushing for their abuser to go. Most of these survivors, at least Coptic survivors, they just want the priest removed from priesthood so people can be safe. They're not even like maliciously, even though these abusers deserve to rot in prison for life. They're not even looking for that. And the church is still not, budging. So actually the biggest comment that we keep getting from Coptic leaders now is, well, why don't you go to the police? Go ahead and get a lawyer. You know why? Because if we look at the statistics and the percentages, like we were just talking about, only according to rain.org, only 310 out of 1,000 cases are reported, and only 25 perpetrators out of 1,000 actually ever see jail time.
Yep. It goes sort of like what you referenced a minute ago, like we were talking about evidentiary concerns. It's like, do folks think they have a video camera and audio equipment recording, when they're assaulted? They aren't. That's one of the problems, right? Is it's so difficult to have evidence for these kind of crimes. And when people treat the word of survivors as something to be second guessed immediately, they don't get the benefit of the doubt. It makes it so much harder to prove them criminally, to your point. So, I mean, that's disturbing that you have a confession and they won't even do anything. I mean,
Yeah.
and I also think that speaks to a level of apathy that folks who experience sexual violence are treated with by. I think it's hard to investigate. It's hard to determine the truth. And I think a lot of people don't want to deal with that.
Yeah.
And I think one of the, one of the cures for that is to pay attention who your local DA is, because a DA who is committed to prosecuting these crimes is going to get more done than someone who's like, I remember a DA in an Orthodox abuse case that I was involved in early on, when people were pressuring him to, lay charges, he threatened the survivors. So pay attention to things like that are going on in your community. I know not too long ago in California, and you probably read about it, there was a rape case down at Stanford, I think. And the abuser the rapist was sentenced to like 6 months in jail for, a violent rape of an unconscious woman with witnesses. There were witnesses who saw.
Yeah, there was a guy who pulled him off. Yeah.
Yeah, they pulled him off. And it's like, that's the kind of, and it was, oh, well, I think it was basically, oh, well, he comes from such a nice family, he was a rich, and I'm sorry, but he was a rich white boy. So no offense, Jack. Exactly. But,
No worries.
so the judge identified with him. I kind of makes you wonder what the judge's history was. And the community rose up against him, and he was tossed out. He wasn't reelected.
Wow. I have a question again from Gina. Are there any credentials that you believe should be a requirement for such a board? What is a better way to manage this board to make sure it's actually changing things?
Wait, Gina, if I could answer that one for you, I think every police accountability board in the country would want to hire me. But sort of as I'm joking there, I think we're hitting on a problem that review boards are well intentioned, but do they in fact work? Do they work? Do they work for these kind of crimes? And I think, when it comes down to it, the very structure, and we're going back to the Catholic Church specifically, the very structure of the Catholic Church, to me, the answer to that question would be no. I mean, because a bishop doesn't have to listen to the board, it doesn't matter what they say. Now, if there were a way in which you could legislate, for example, as has been done here in Chicago with our civilian oversight police review board, when they have an officer involved shooting or police misconduct or something like that that's brought forward, all of their deliberations, decisions, and votes are immediately made public after the meeting, immediately. If that could happen in the Catholic Church, where a review board would have what the information, the evidence that they could present publicly, redacted or whatever, they could have that, if they could have their reasoning and what decision they made and post that publicly, then a review board would be very powerful. But the very structure of the church means that's not going to happen. That's one of the big problems. We're sort of getting into kind of the meat of the issue here, but that's one of the big problems with reform within the Roman Catholic Church in general, is that it is, as much of it is a local church, it is in fact a government institution. It has its own rules, its ways of doing things. And one of the ways of doing things that is really core to the church is that bishops and cardinals have ultimate authority when they're put into those positions. So it would have to require a significant rewrite of canon law, for lay people to have, any input in the way that we think would be helpful. So it's a really kind of depressing answer, but the answer is I don't think there's anything a review board can do that's going to make a difference.
Wow.
And I think it's also going to require, for true change, I think it requires a change in perspective, in that the church is not the clergy, the church is not the buildings, the church is not its art or its wealth, the church is the community of believers.
Yep.
And that's what needs protection. And I think, where you have a scandal is not that you have priests abusing. There are abusers in every walk of life. We can't detect them. We can't predict who's going to abuse. What we can do is, once an abuser is identified, is remove him. And I do think that removing him from the clergy is one step, but you also want to make sure it's known that that person is an abuser. So he can't go from the priesthood to a school or a counseling position. And that's also something that's happened in the Catholic Church.
Wow. I have a question for you both. As you know, I've exposed publicly about, I don't know, I lost count, like maybe 5 or 6 Coptic priests abusers. But I had evidence and documents to back it up, and like specifically internal documents from the church to back it up, which are irrefutable. What are your thoughts on exposing clergy that I don't have solid, like let's say I've had 2 survivors report the same guy. They're not willing to speak. They're not willing to, they're afraid to speak, but they've both reported it to me. Now I know this abuser exists in this area. what can I do to expose these priests without getting legally, without getting sued?
Not much.
Move out of the US.
And then
Like,
expose them.
in our very litigious country, yeah, you could definitely be sued. I mean, what you're hitting at those, I mean, that's a very significant problem, and one that's endemic to the issue of sexual violence, right? I mean, the proof, if you will, is so incredibly personal in these kind of cases. And when you have a survivor who doesn't want to go public, which is a totally understandable and respectable decision, it's difficult. I think that you as an advocate, and especially when you get to the position you're in, where you're a credible advocate, other people listen to you and they believe you, and you were to say something like, I've received reports that, a person, people will believe what you say. The problem is, can you say that and not get sued?
Yeah.
And I think in the United States, the answer is really no. I mean, we've gotten sued when we're 100% correct, and the truth is an absolute defense, and eventually the truth gets heard, but that's only after many thousands of dollars spent on attorneys and, staff time.
So I should
think
an attorney before.
definitely that. And I think one more solutions-oriented answer to this very difficult question might be to do something that you're already doing, which is forming connections with other groups, folks like us, other players in this space, because the stronger we are together, the more information we have, the more resources we might have, the more corroboration we might have. I mean,
Yes.
so I think the more that we work together and recognize that all of our issues are tied together, and I'm not just talking about religion here, I'm talking about the issue of sexual violence writ large. I mean, we all have to kind of be working together on this in order to make sure that survivor voices like those, they don't need to go out and have their picture splashed on the front page of a paper to be listened to, and the sad fact is, I don't think we're quite there yet. We're getting there, we're working towards it, but we're not there yet, not in the United States.
The other thing to remember is that this is a marathon. It's not a sprint.
There you go.
And you may have those, I had an early case that we handled in the late 1990s, early 2000s, where we had, someone come forward and, we sent them to an attorney with possibility of filing a civil case, but there wasn't enough. She wanted at least one other victim. We were patient. We waited, and we ended up with, I think, a total of 6 ultimately. But
Yeah.
sometimes you just have to wait, and maybe it's even a matter of maybe these people aren't willing to come forward now. Maybe with some help and some support, maybe they will be a year from now.
Yeah.
And hopefully they'll still be able to file, a civil action or criminal charges.
Yeah, exactly.
But the fact of the matter is
Like-
that some survivors are going to fall through the cracks. They're going to miss their opportunities, and there's not too much we can do about it. I mean, if someone writes to you and says, as I used to get emails, well, what about the priest at this church? And you say, no, I wouldn't go there if I were you.
Yeah. I
You don't have to expand on it.
I get a lot of those.
And it's private communication. You're not publicizing anything, so you should be safe from repercussions.
Does the word allegation protect me? Like, I've received multiple allegations from survivors about this. No?
No.
No, because you'd still be promulgating information that could be detrimental to their reputation, even if it was. So there are certain times where words like that can help you, but you need to have a lot of backing.
Okay,
Yeah.
so in order to do that, I have to be prepared with some sort of evidence, unfortunately, whether
Yeah.
it's, and evidence
Because-
doesn't necessarily mean to the folks who are unfamiliar, evidence doesn't mean that, she set up a tripod in the room before
Right.
we walked in. Evidence could be like, in 2008 is when she started emailing the church, which is like what I did.
Yeah.
I started emailing the church for years and years and years, and so many bishops knew and they didn't deny it. And, so you can trace these things.
Yep.
You don't necessarily have to have DNA evidence or any of that.
And testimony, survivor testimony is evidence.
Is evidence.
A lot of people don't think about it that way, but it is. And sometimes, even if it's just, one person's word against another, you can find the victim credible.
If I have a survivor that's willing to write a testimony, but as a Jane Doe, do you think that that would be sufficient to expose her abuser with her testimony? Or
I'd check with
I-
an attorney in your area first, every time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I just like going public with information where the survivor isn't willing. I mean, they don't have to, we would have to put their name out in public, but they have to be available. Say, if you put that out and a reporter from that area wants to talk to them, they have to be willing to talk to the reporter and reveal their name to the reporter. If I just don't, because I think it's just too risky. And then you can't help the people that are willing to come forward if you are put out of business by helping someone who's not at that point yet.
I understand. Okay. I don't see, I think we've answered all the questions in our Instagram Live and in Zoom. I don't want to keep you all too long. I just want to end by recognizing what happened in the United States a couple days ago. I want to give everybody a moment to rage, moment of silence, moment of whatever feeling that you want to feel. If anybody would like to express how they're feeling, this is the time. I will not take too long, but I will express why this hit me really hard, is that rapists now have more rights than women and victims. In many states now, laws have been passed that allow a victim's rapist and his family to sue her if she chooses to abort in the resulting pregnancy. So what's going to happen now in many states, if not across the entire country at some point, is all victims of sexual assault will be required to carry their rapist's baby if they get pregnant. The options for them is abort and get sued by your rapist and his family or his family, abort and go to prison, and along with whoever helped you abort could go to prison, whoever aided and abetted, and you don't abort and you keep the baby, and that's trauma. And then you have to co-parent with your rapist now? Because is the government going to take the place of that father and provide for your child if the rapist doesn't? What if you can't identify the rapist? There are just so many things that are so wrong with what's happening right now that we have to fight more than ever before. This hit home for me because I also, in addition to being sexually abused by a priest when I was 12, I was actually raped in college when I was 21. I was actually a student in the College of Pharmacy. So it's a doctorate program, very stressful. My fellow students and I, a group of us, were like a family. Went out after, it was my first time being drunk. I did all the right things. I had a designated driver. I had people that I trusted. I had a girl from my class that was a close friend stay over with me in my apartment. I did all the right things. I got home safely, blacked out. Like, that's when the alcohol hit. I blacked out, unconscious, woke up with a guy on top of me, recognized him from earlier in the night, asked him what happened, obviously panicked, got my clothes on that he had taken off, asked him what happened. He didn't lie. He told the entire truth. He told the truth that he knew I was unconscious, that he broke into my apartment, that he went home, got in his car and drove back to my apartment because he saw where my friends dropped me off. He confessed everything. And then it actually took me, because so many people have seen in comments like, well, why don't you just go to the police? Oh, do y'all think that a woman or a girl gets raped and her automatic first response is, I've been raped, let me go to the hospital. That's not how it works. I was in denial, like there's a denial phase. And so, you know, had my girlfriend not spent the night on the couch and I told her something happened as soon as she woke up, she was the one that was like, so you were raped. I couldn't even use the word. It took me all day and for her to recruit another one of our friends to convince me or to get me out of my denial that I was raped. And then they both physically and forcibly had to put me in the car and physically and forcibly get me to the ER and get me to say the words to the nurse at the front desk, I was raped. And that was one of the hardest. I mean, I was hysterical at that point to even have to come to the realization of what happened to me. So this is why survivors don't report right away. Even though I reported, I went to the hospital, I got a rape kit. For those who don't know what a rape kit is, this is basically a 4 to 6 hour exam where, I don't know, you have like 17 people in the room examining your insides and outsides of your body. There is law enforcement by your side taking notes. There are like counselors or peer like victim support. There are several nurses and doctors. You're pumped with antivirals, antibiotics, Plan B, which is an emergency contraceptive to make sure that you don't get pregnant with your rapist baby, which, by the way, we have a high chance of getting that taken away now because our government is going after contraception next. And they consider Plan B, I guess some consider it an abortion pill. So that might be taken away. Afterwards, my rapist actually got my number from someone from school and began to harass me, calling my phone multiple times a day, harassing me, begging me not to go to the police. He wasn't aware that I'd already gone to the hospital and reported him. I did all the right things. I followed every instruction the detectives told me, every instruction the doctors told me. I was 21. I'm following the professionals and what they're telling me. I participated willingly and I cooperated with the investigation. I went to the police department almost daily for months. Because my rapist was calling me, I'm ignoring his calls. The police thought it's a good opportunity to get him to have a confession over the phone, a controlled call. I sat in the police department, they coached me, we got him on the phone. He confessed everything once again in detail, using the R word and everything. His family was rich, hired Tim Jansen, who is known to be the best attorney in Florida to protect specifically athletes or wealthy rapists. And he got the tape thrown out. He got the confession tape thrown out. So I lost the case with DNA, with forensics, with cooperating with a full investigation. This took 5 years of my life. And this was a criminal investigation. So you can do all the right things in America as a survivor of sexual assault and still lose. It's only going to get worse for victims. Had I been raped today in Texas instead of 2008, this could have gone a lot differently for me and a lot more, as if like what I went through wasn't traumatic enough. Imagine what women are going to have to go through in the future, and girls, and not the future, like starting today, like they enacted it, the same day in most states. So that was my heart goes out to everybody who is all future victims that are going to have to be in that situation. And I didn't mean to get off topic, but I couldn't let this end without us recognizing this tragedy and to give people the space to mourn or rage or whatever it is they want to do. You have every right. But anyway, I want to thank Snap for joining us. This has been, I mean, you guys are, I have so much more to learn from y'all, so I'm excited to come to the conference. This has been recorded, so it will be on YouTube. I will figure out if there's a way to, I'm pretty sure I can get it on Instagram and Facebook as well. I want the world to know about everything that you guys just spoke about and taught us. It's so important. The work you do is so important, and I hope to follow in your footsteps. And I just thank you all so much for all the support that you've given Coptic Survivor since before Coptic Survivor even started. So thank you, sending you all love over here on Instagram who have been following, and this will be posted soon. Sending you all love and peace. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Sally. Take
Thanks,
care.
Ellen.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.
Awesome. Thanks, Sally.
Wow. Thank you, guys. That's amazing. Are you able to share your presentation, or is that?
Yeah, no problem. I'll share my slides with you, no problem. And then, yeah,
Amazing.
whatever you need. So.
Yeah, thank
Ellie,
you.
Sorry.
Sorry?
No, sorry. I was just going to ask if the live stream was done or not, but
No,
okay.
I turned it off. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I wanted to say thank you, Zach. And also I really appreciate the context around the statistics, because it doesn't show the whole picture for you to just say like, these are the numbers. You have to explain the context of where these numbers come from and all of the components that make up the study and that kind of thing. And it's really jarring that those are the statistics, and that's just in the US. I think it hit me at some point, and like when you were talking, it just hit me at some point, like the Catholic Church and also the Coptic Church at this point are both global organizations. And so
Exactly.
This is just looking at the United States and not even the whole entire world. But it was great that you gave the context for the studies and where they got the numbers from and that kind of thing. I think it was it added more of a depth to the numbers. It was perfect.
Good. I appreciate that feedback. That's helpful, because I always want to make sure I'm not just spouting math at people,
No.
things. And to your point, like I've ended this presentation by saying this before, but like, the US, as backwards as we are, we're way ahead of many other countries when it comes to confronting this issue. And think about the power that the Catholic Church wields worldwide in countries like the Philippines, or, other what do we call them, the minor outlying islands or whatever, but like these Catholic strongholds that we have proof that these hierarchs have sent abusers to for years, because no one cares about those little islands. And it's like, we know everything that's happening here is happening tenfold in these other places, and it needs to be discerned and shared, like you said. So
for sure. No, I think to use your words, I think you would be just spewing math if you didn't add the context. Yeah. So
cool,
I think that's
good. Well, thank you again for the invite, Sally. Thanks. I'll follow up with the slides. Anything else I can do, let me know. Otherwise, looking forward to seeing you in Denver.
Yes, I'm so excited. Should we talk about anything before we go? Do I need to register also? Or
no, you're good. Don't worry about registration. We're set.
Okay, thank you.
I have to add you to my registration list, though. That is a reminder to me. Add Sally to list. Okay, got you. But no, I think we're good. If you have any.
Hey, Virginia, what if we have Zach and Melanie and anybody from their board or team? What if we collaborate and have a meeting with our board, and maybe they can kind of show us the ropes of like how they operate? Because Zach, I've been struggling to lead. Correct?
No, Sally, don't sell yourself short.
We're all kind of struggling with building this because it's just so many parts to it, and it's exhausting, and nobody's getting paid, and like, we're all doing this for free, and so I'd like to learn from you guys, like how you operate really your organization.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. I also have someone on my board who I think you should connect with, just based off the last 30 seconds of what you said. Her name is Gila Benchamal. She is wonderful. I don't know if you've ever met her or heard her, but she's a Jewish Orthodox survivor from Toronto, and she's an academic. She does a lot of research on this work, but she also spent her entire career in nonprofits and on this issue. And I go to her all the time for like, hey, Gilla, I just need a little bit of help organizationally here, or think me through this knot that I'm trying to untangle. And I'm sure she would be happy to help. I guarantee you she would. She's very busy this month with some conferences, but I'll introduce you to her and I'll talk with her independently. I think she would be very happy to help and advise you. I think it'd be a good thing to do.
Amazing. Yeah, I would love for that. Yeah, thank you.
But as far, literally, like I said, literally anything I could do, just let me know. And we'll make some time and we can meet with your board. That's not a problem. Sounds like a great idea. So.
Thank you. That's amazing. Okay, awesome. I'm going to tell them. I appreciate you so
Yeah,
much.
we'll just figure out the calendar. So
I'll see you next month. I'm so
all
excited.
right. Yes. Thank you, Judy. It was
Yes.
good talking with you. Thanks, Sally. Good to
And
see
let me know
you.
if there's anything I can do to help you prepare for the conference.
All right, I will. Take
All
care, y'all. Until your someday.
Bye. Bye.
All right, thank you. Thank you. Sally, I will say my iPad is about to die. It's like at 4%. So
Okay,
yeah.
girl.
But is
Love
there anything
you.
that you wanted to touch
Sure.
on before?
No, thank you for participating and being here the whole time. You're amazing. Thank you. I think we need to just I feel like this is why like I want a marketing team, because it's really sad that Snap, like this is such a missed opportunity.
Yeah.
And so yeah, that's why I'm asking for a marketing team. I think
it would be helpful to have, like, that's why the what's it called? Website. Like, that's why I was thinking that would be a good idea, because at this point now, when we're doing, like, I don't have a media presence whatsoever. I literally only have like, not even people that I've met through school, because I don't add people that I don't know. So I literally just add like people that I talk to on a regular basis.
Yeah.
And so I have no reach,
Yeah.
And so like posting on random, like, I think that it would be good to post that way, but also having like a specific website, a specific like Twitter account, all of that kind of stuff that's not through you, but just like the name itself is Coptic Survivor, not Sally. And that way you're shifting the focus off of you and onto the organization as a whole. Yeah, just because it is so much for you to be doing on your own. And then it's not even bad leadership. It's just that like when you are not delegating, you are responsible for everything. And that's not fair, and it's not possible for one person to do everything. And you're also a human being, and this is not like literally your everyday life. You should be able to take a break, because it's exhausting emotional work. So yeah, no. And I also want to say, I do apologize. I feel like I haven't really contributed anything in all of the time that we've been doing,
No, listen, it's nobody really, like, everybody has their shit going on, and you've participated. Like, after I kind of dropped in and talked to you, remember very briefly, like I was like, I really want you there. I really want everybody there. I think every single one of you is essential. And that's why I get frustrated when one of you drops off, because we have to work as a unit. And if it's going to be impossible, like I literally was like, we need to take out all these people from the board, because I am not going to have a board meeting every month where only half the participants are present and they signed up for this time. And I've been begging for everybody to respect the time, be there the whole time. Let's find solutions. I literally created an entire agenda of all the needs. Everybody, basically every single need was shot down before I could even finish my sentence. Like, this is not a debate. Okay, if you guys want me to lead, this is what I need you to do. Go do it.
Yeah.
I've been a leader. Okay, maybe I'm not like the best at leading this because I'm still learning, but I am a natural leader. I have led this mother effing Southern Diocese basketball league. And I know like people might think like, oh, it's so sports, whatever. But I've managed teams for Coptic churches nationally for 15 years.
Yeah.
So I know how leadership goes. I know how to delegate. We have like all the right people on board, but just not in the right seats, like not in the right places. And that's what I was trying to accomplish today.
Yeah,
when I have a board meeting, it should be with everybody that has nothing to do with the day-to-day Coptic Survivor stuff. It should be accounting. The accountant should not know, oh, are y'all posting? Are y'all doing an event? Y'all are the team that I need to be in every one of our events.
Yeah.
everyone, or if you can't, I will find other dedicated people to be in every one of our events. I need support. I cannot be the face of this forever. Like you said, it should be Coptic Survivor, not Sally Z.
Yeah.
I know everybody's busy. So am I.
Yeah. What I will say, I think, so you have all of the passion and all of the leadership, but and like everybody else on the board has.
Tell me how it is. If I'm being a
No,
bitch
that's
about
what
it,
that's what I'm doing. But you have the leadership and the passion, but not, and like the dreams for what you want the organization to be, but maybe not the nitty-gritty knowledge of how to do all of the specific things.
Mhm.
And what supplements that is like everybody else on the board kind of has experience in this realm of activism and stuff. So they do have the know-how, but they also have organizations that they're working on. And so they can only really give like wisdom and advice and that kind of thing, but not so much the actual like work of it, if that makes sense. And so that's where like I feel like a lot of the disconnect is too. But I'm not attached, like this is the only organization that I'm a part of. And so whereas other people have legitimate, like they have organizations that they've already been working on and they have positions in, and so all that they can really contribute is a few hours or maybe just their knowledge. I have the time. I don't have any of the knowledge though.
I recognize that, and this was my proposal. My proposal today was to move our current board into an advisory board position.
Yeah.
Because all they've done is advise.
Mhm.
Okay, I understand they don't have time, but then don't tell me, no, keep the board. We're all gonna help. Don't worry, you're not alone. I am alone. Okay, the team we have now needs to be an advisory board, or could be an advisory board, or whoever wants to take on a department of their own and recruit teams. Cool. Again, board meetings should be an accountant, maybe an attorney, like a general attorney that we retain for Coptic Survivor.
Legal questions.
Like, yeah, like stuff that has nothing to do, like, hey, accountant and lawyer both in the room. This is what we're doing with money. Lawyer, is this legal? Yes, cool. Accountant, move forward. You know what I'm saying? Like it needs to be a very small.
Can you do me, or I'm gonna ask for something. Whenever you have the time and the ability, and you've dictated what you want very clearly, but if you could like pull out a document and just list like just bullet points, like I want the organization to do this and do this and do this and do this.
I did.
And do this.
That was the agenda today. That was the agenda.
Yeah. And so, but
and nobody
like
wanted to sign up for everything.
Too.
Every single thing that I put on there, we didn't even get to get into the stuff. Like everything I put on there is the stuff that is an immediate need. So when people are like, this is what a multi-million-dollar, you're reaching for the stars. Cool. Guess what? Go find your team of great people. Find, if 2 of them want to do it for free, cool. If 3 of them need to get paid, how much do they need to get paid? Let us know so we can fundraise, because I'm not going to start fundraising like everybody give us money. Don't worry. We're going to do good things with it. No, I need to understand how we're going to do the funding. I want to be completely transparent. I want to say on the website, we have this team handling this. We have this team handling this. I want everybody's faces so survivors know that they can trust us and trust the people that they're talking to. I want a bio. I want these people to, however much they need, let us know so we know to raise that money. Therefore, I can make an itemized list publicly and say, I need this much for an attorney. I need this much for mental health support. I need this much for immigration lawyers. That's step 1. And it's sad that you're the only one still. Hello?